All right, welcome back. Episode 35. We have a return guest today, Mr. Steve Horney. Thank you for coming, sir.
It is a pleasure and an honor.
Oh, it was very good. So if you haven't heard the first episode that we did with Steve, definitely go back and listen to that. I recently re-listened to that, and that was recorded in 2018. And we went over several things in terms of practice management, some key elements of that, and even the transitioning from working for somebody and then end up working for yourself. So we might review that a little bit today and then go into some other stuff.
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback from that podcast, and one of the key things were the 5 key. You were very concise and clear on that. You outlined it very well. So I would love to review that at some point today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming.
Sure,
Appreciate
happy
it.
to be here. And to add, and we can just jump right into this, but the last one I've changed a little bit. After I went back and listened, and I was like, that's some good shit. I want to change it a little bit. The last one we actually changed to play not to lose. And never would I say that in any athletics, but play not to lose for that, because you have to endure in the beginning. So we all remember that become a gangster-ass clinician.
Yes.
That's really important. And the location, again, the location isn't West 4th and 6th. It's more finding that gym that needs you, finding that gym that has independent contractors, finding that gym that has trainers, that you're cool with making 120% of what they're making, because then that's going to eliminate that hurdle for those patients. Then setting up that side hustle, that's really important. That's really challenging, obviously. And then metrics. Remember, this isn't an emotional conversation. This isn't us saying that, oh, I want to start my own business, so I'm going to start my business. It's foolish to approach it that way. And then just remember that kind of if someone can talk you out of it, then you're not built for it. Look back at what you've done in your life. Again, we've discussed me being an Italian cuisine transportation specialist.
Yes.
That's
great.
I like the hustle. I was always built like that. Yeah, but it showed me, like, I like that grind. I like that not knowing what it is. I'll invest in me above anyone else. And when I invested in myself, I know I could get a little bit better tips. If I hustled, I could get a little bit better. And I knew if I worked a little harder, I could get a few more patients. And I knew that if I took another course, I'd help a few more people and make a few more connections. Like, that was always how I was kind of like built. That's always how I grinded. So I kind of knew that that was the life that I wanted to choose for the rest of mine. But then we kind of changed around just the last bit, is like play not to lose. And that relates back to the metrics, but make sure that you're not just going in and being like, oh, if I build it, they will come. You really need to be smart about this, because the first year and 2 years is just about enduring. Everything's going to be thrown at you. You're going to have your insurance be a little bit more than you thought that it was going to be. You're going to have to pay to publish in New York, which is a pain in the ass to become an LLC. You don't see that $2,000 coming. There's a lot of things that you don't necessarily see. So just small ball it in the beginning, play not to lose. Make sure that you're going to be able to survive those until your business really starts to build up.
Very great information. I could relate on all points, but Steve, you put it together very nicely.
Happy to do it.
What has been going on, sir, since your last recording?
Oh man, it's been great, but it's been really fun to take a lot of the courses that we've been taking and a lot of the people that we've been teaching with and put a lot of that into one course. And this isn't a commercial for this course. It's for that course, which is coming up June 8th and 9th at Flex Physical Therapy.
Plug it all day, man.
Click on ihealthsciences.com courses and sign up on Eventbrite. It's at Flex Physical Therapy. They're great. But we're taking all the things that we've decided to put into our practice and share them. I'm not saying that we do anything that person doesn't do, that person doesn't do, that person doesn't do, that person doesn't do. But I think we're really good at bringing it all together. And I think the way that we bring it all together is really good for our patients, and therefore sharing that with the people that we like, the people that we want to teach. We went and talked to NYU DPT students about it. It was pretty cool. We were supposed to be there for an hour and a half, like 3 hours later, we ended up walking out. And that feels good, because you realize that they're seeing something different than they've seen in their clinical rotations. They're seeing something different than their teachers are teaching them. And again, we're not reinventing the wheel. Almost in effect, frankly, we are breaking it down to its most simple pieces. Things have gotten kind of complicated. Yes. Let's bring it down. Let's make it simple, but let's make it packageable, because if you understand it, that's great. You have your doctorate. You have many years of clinical practice. But if our patients don't truly understand what we're telling them to do, you're not going to get that full buy-in. And if you don't get that full buy-in, you'll get people better, but you get more people better if you can break it down, make it simple, and make sure that they can understand, because when they understand, then they transition from being that patient to that student. And then when you have them as that student, you've got someone for life, because as you learn, they're going to want to learn, but they're going to be so much better because the feedback that they give is going to be so much more spot on. They're going to be the ones that are telling you, like, you know what, actually, I realized when I eat this thing, or when I go on this, or I went away and I drank this, and then I went in through, or I noticed that if I don't do this exercise, then I tend to have problems there. And you're going to take all that and process it even better and be a better clinician to them, because they're not just a patient, they're a student.
Mm-hmm.
I love that that analogy of a student, because I think a lot of the old model kind of has this hierarchy, like authoritative white coat thing.
Of course.
And there's a lot of less and less buy-in toward that. With patients are a lot more savvy and well-read, and they kind of know what they haven't. They're overwhelmed with information, but they have a lot more information than they had.
Right.
So I think the student-teacher relationship is one where, you know, there's respect, mutual respect, but I think it's more beneficial.
I couldn't agree more. And it's nice that things are shifting with the more information that people can get on podcasts like yours, the internet, take it or leave it. It's here to stay.
Right.
They're a lot more informed. They may not be as well directed, but they're more informed, and they have access to health literacy, whether they choose to get into those sources or not. Right. So it's our job to be flexible and change. 14 years ago, things were different when I started practicing. And 14 years before that, it was very different. So let's treat our patients in the model that exists today. So,
right. And you're creating, I mean, we're all kind of creating separate models, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
Within, like you said, we're not reinventing the wheel, but packaging it in a way that is digestible.
Totally.
And buying.
And simple. I mean, when we can start talking about what we're talking about, but I mean, a few things have happened. One, I work with someone who I think just naturally gets things. I was always had to work hard in school. I don't mind admitting that. I'm above average intelligence, I would guess, but I still had to put in that work and make things simple and understandable. That's where a lot of this has come from me, is making things, breaking them down into how, if I were studying them, how I would want them to look like, and then teaching that way. So I don't feel like when I'm teaching, I'm ever throwing anything over the backstop. In general, if I break it down to make it the way that it would have made it sit in my head for the longest and truly understand and grasp that, I'm doing a great job. So that's kind of where I'm talking about, like, not reinventing the wheel. It's really exciting because what we're really doing is making things as simple as possible, but not overlooking the major things. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Right.
So.
Right. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, the development of some of this course was, you recently have taken Craig Liebenson's, which you talked about in the last episode. Yep. And there's different levels, right, to his courses.
Right. And I think I've taken all that have been. I've been at least 4 courses with him.
Oh, wow.
One was a kettlebell course. He's really good. He's really good at that.
Yeah.
He's really good at taking from a lot of different places and having a fluid program, meaning if something comes out, if there's new research that comes out, he's switching right away. You'll see here, we're going to talk about our crazy 8s and our developmental dozens and things like that. Those are fluid as well. I am never married. I am only giving you what I think is best at this moment in time. And that's kind of fun to be able to play in that system. Plug to Squarespace. I mean, having a website that I can go on and in 5 minutes edit it is amazing. Our Foundations of Health, which we'll talk about in a second, I go on that all the time. I have a secret sauce portion of our website too, which is like how we train ourselves and taking it through from like systems prep, and then our pillar prep, and then our 8 basic categories of exercise, and then the wind down at the end. Like, I'm always finding new exercises and adding them in, and it's pretty awesome that in today's day and age, where it's not a book that's getting printed, we can be flexible, we can be fluid, and we can always be learning without learning something being like, oh, now I got to update this book, so I'm going to put this in the next version. It's like, no, in 5 seconds, I click escape when I'm on my own website, I do-do-do-do, and then I save it, and it's done. And then whatever I had before is fantastic, and that's great, but when someone comes back and they ask me for something more current, I know that whatever I'm giving them is the most current thing.
That's awesome.
So it's pretty cool.
Very cool. It evolves. I mean, as information and research does.
Exactly. And that's the thing. There's shifts. There's shifts and there's pendulum swings, and that's what's kind of beautiful. I've been around for long enough that I've seen pendulums swing and swing back, and it's nice to have enough work on one side. Let's say like manual therapy, movement science. Like I was in the manual therapy world when I first started. It was manual therapy, but the questions were: are you a trigger point guy? Are you a joint mobilization guy? Like that was the question. Like there was nothing else. And then you kind of start to realize, maybe you need to know both. And I think that what's important is I think people like to be pendulum swung to one side because that's just easier. How much easier is it to be like, no, manual therapy is garbage. I just need to know movement science.
Right.
Congratulations. You only need to know one thing. That's way easier. No, you need to know manual therapy and you need to know movement science.
Absolutely.
And that's going to take way more years to master, but it's worth it because that's what works. So that's how we kind of looked at everything and tried not to just get swung by what was happening, but realize that things are inside of a box. If we go inside a box, outside a box, if we look at things that are inside the box, they were in the box for a reason. They may not be dogmatically placed in there forever, but there was a reason that they got put in there. And just make sure that they stay in that box to be used for when they're supposed to be used. So
for sure,
that's how we roll.
And the course in June, this is catered to both clinicians and trainers, or are you just trying to get
It's actually kind of funny because we started it out as movement science for the clinician, FIRE, functional integrated rehabilitation exercise. And then we built it and realized there was nothing in there that trainers couldn't do. There was nothing at all. And then we quickly switched it. And what a better way than just to get everyone together and just say, here, we all have access to this. Let's learn from each other because a lot of really good trainers are way better than physical therapists at understanding movement science. I'm not saying every trainer. I'm not saying the brand new trainer, but those ones that take their craft so seriously. The people that you guys see at Strong First, the people that have their masters in kines. Those people, when all you have is movement science, and I'm just saying we have different lanes. Like when you are a strength coach, all you have is movement science. If you're not a PT, you can't touch people. Then you get really good at it, and they're pretty amazing. So that's why we decided to open it up to everyone and just get a good group there. More than half of our network is trainers. As we talked in the last one, I've never marketed to a doctor. Yes. I don't particularly enjoy it, frankly, but I love talking to trainers. They're so much fun. And then we teach trainers. Every month we teach the Gotham trainers once every Monday, and then once a month we teach the Equinox Printing House. So we're always teaching trainers, and there's no reason why we can't all just get together because this stuff doesn't go over anyone's head.
It's a great strategy. I mean, a lot of good things. I think we might have mentioned on other podcasts, but you're tapping into a market that has this spendable income, not the trainers, but their clients. They're passionate about fitness and health. So that's another easy, there's a buy-in there. And then again, it's a fun place to be around. There's a lot of interesting characters and a variety of characters.
and for my final little anecdote, because I actually went back and listened. I was like, shared a lot in that last podcast. There was a lot more than just like nuts and bolts there about how I started practice. But I was recently, my buddy opened up a gym down in Seabright, New Jersey. Jim's Gym, if you want to check it out.
Oh, all right.
And
plug.
He gave me the keys to it. It's just like, come in whenever you like, whatever. Mi casa, su casa, or gimnasio, su gimnasio. So he handed me the keys, and I went in maybe like 11:30 on a Saturday night, and it was the best experience. I'm like, this is me. I'm back. This is why I got into physical therapy. I got into physical therapy because I really enjoyed sitting in a rusty-ass weight room in the basement, where our weight room and our wrestling room were the same room, with the rusty plates where if you wore a white shirt, you would actually get the rust on you. You guys might be young and I don't know, like where it was like rubber plates already, but like we were rusty-ass plates. And I remember with my like Umbro shirt that I got like this orange that my mom couldn't get out. And it was just the happiest that I'd ever been in my life. And recently I walked into my buddy's gym, and it's a gym, and it smells like a gym. We all know what that is.
Yeah,
and I think anyone else would have walked in and been like, oh my God, that's gross. And I walked in, I was
where's
like,
the eucalyptus, right?
Exactly. And I was like, oh my God, this is home.
Yeah.
This is it. This makes me so happy. That smells so good.
Mildew, sweat. Yep.
Exactly. It's just how it should be. It's not. It's a very clean gym. It's just like a gym is a gym.
Sure.
So it was really, really cool. And just that was when I was like, I'm home. I made it back home. And this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So it's really, really fun. So to talk about the way that we may look at the body somewhat uniquely. And again, I don't think that we're doing anything, but we might call something a little bit differently. And honestly, like our pillar prep is unique to us. Not that pillar prep is unique, but in general, the way that we approach pillar prep is unique and something that we genuinely came up with through our experiences and our teaching. But in general, I think that we package things pretty well. And what we really look at, it's not like other people aren't looking at the whole body, but I think that we do a really good job of breaking it down into our foundations of health. So the first thing I want to talk about is our foundations of health. Then that's, we'll say like the bottom of the pyramid. On top of that is our PIP diagnosis model. And that's pathology impairment pattern diagnosis model, which is again the way that we really like to get a complete diagnosis. You got to follow the PIP diagnosis model. And then the I, which is the impairments in that, is your pillar prep, which again, we take a little bit of a unique look at, but then also our crazy 8, which is more of our functional assessments. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you all about and just put it out there because I think that it'll help out a lot of people. I think that this is one of the podcasts that if you're not a clinician, you'll still enjoy it because I'm talking directly to you. I'm not speaking any differently than when I talk to my patients. They need to understand our foundations of health. They need to understand what goes into a diagnosis. They don't need to know that we call it a PIP, a pattern impairment pathology diagnosis model, but they need to understand that they don't have a defective supraspinatus tendon. They weren't born with a defective supraspinatus tendon. They weren't born with a more susceptible to tear meniscus. They were born with some patterns that they did, some impairments that developed, and some pathologies that we're taking care of, but it goes all the way back. And then in that impairment, as we were talking about, pillar prep is something that I think by the end of this, everyone will be like, cool, I'm on board. I totally get it. Thanks, Steve. And thanks for making it simple. And I'll say, no problem. Happy to. That's what I do. So to start our foundation about like the bottom of that pyramid, and we kind of touched on this last time, but this is where I would say that I would say traditional Chinese medicine has been the biggest influence on me. So again, one of people that I teach with, which is our integrated clinician, where our integrated clinician course, which we have coming up, again, check on the website, but we have one coming up in November, and we're going to do one over the summer as well in August. That's where we, instead of fighting with acupuncturists about dry needling legislation, we learn from one another because I can take an acupuncturist and make them into a super acupuncturist by teaching them this much movement science. And they can take me as a physical therapist, and Peter D'Aquino is the one who did this for me, and make me into that sounds egotistical. A better physical therapist.
Right. Super physical therapist.
Super physical therapist. You guys, I would never say that about myself.
No.
By simply looking at the body as a whole, I think it's so cool that Western people came up with a biopsychosocial model that had never been thought of in traditional Chinese medicine. Wait a minute. It was. It was thought thousands and thousands of years ago. And then we come up with movement science. Isn't that so cool that we did? Wait a minute. Tai Chi. They used to be packaged together. That was the beauty of it. Wow. You had your holistic, traditional Chinese medicine that was looking at everything, and maybe to a fault, more like liver and things, like everything being connected. But things are certainly in traditional Chinese medicine connected to more than just the pathology. And then you also have to think about the movement science. That was also part of it. Tai Chi originally was part of traditional Chinese medicine and needles. They had it all. They had looking at the body as a whole unit, and they had the treatment, the manual therapy, if you will, and their gua sha and their needles, and they also had the movement science to back up what they were doing. But we as Americans just like passive modalities, or like Tai Chi, that's for hippies, and then the needles, I can sleep because I'm so sympathetic right now. That makes me parasympathetic, and it makes me feel better. Cool. And frankly, I don't even care where you put the needle as long as I get to lay on this table for 1 hour during my wretched life. So it's like, cool. So that's kind of where our foundations of health, which is again is the foundation of everything that we look at, is really important. So in that we have your hydration and your diet. You have your sleep and stress, your exercise, your ergonomics, and breathing. Those are the 7 things that I felt like I was constantly going at people and saying, like, hey, is there any chance that you're dehydrated? Is there any chance you have a really shitty diet? Is there any chance you're not sleeping all that well? And then it just kind of came like this, like, this is taking way too much time every time. So what we do is we have it on our website, and that definitely check out and link to it, do whatever you want. But our Foundations of Health on our website is really important for our new patients. So every time that we send them their insurance, which that's like the only time they're actually reading emails that we're sending them, we link to it and say, check this out, because this is how we think. So you start to take a little bit of inventory about your hydration, a little bit of inventory about your diet, a little bit of sleep, a little bit of stress, a little bit of exercise, a little bit of ergonomics, a little bit of breathing. Just think about it. Where do I fall on these? And then after we do the whole evaluation, at the end, when they're initializing their little waiver thing, it's right there. And we don't even make them feel bad. We say all these things, and it's a little visual analog scale, and it's great or not great. We don't even want to make like bad or good. No, great or not great. That sounds really nice. Right. So then we make sure that we start that conversation with them so that they understand that nothing happens in a vacuum, that your shoulder is more than just a tendon. And so we make sure that they understand, hey, you get 64 ounces if you're an athlete more. Your diet in general, we know that's like processed foods. I think it's funny because I study a lot of diet information, partially because I'm very curious about it for myself and trying to look at how maybe ethics play into the way, trying to balance the ethics and the anti-inflammatory longevity component and seeing where they intersect and where they don't. I always think it's really interesting. Walter Longo, who's the head of the USC Longevity Center, is a really interesting guy, and he's got a bunch of great talks. In general, I recommend his STEM talk, which was awesome. So if you Google STEM talk, Walter Longo, longevity, it'll come up. But it's some really interesting research that even like protein, we can think about protein and we can talk about there being more or less protein in people's diets. And there's some obviously calorie restrictions where earthworms have lived a lot longer and things like that, and humans as well. But it's really interesting when you kind of look at and listen to someone where that's all that they do. And it's pretty interesting stuff. So I don't think anyone who's been talking about diet would say processed foods are good. So let's just say that. Yes. And I do think in general that the research is trending more towards a plant slant. That being said, we all know that lean body mass, grip strength, aerobic capacity, lower extremity power are really important things. So it can only be to a point, and I'm not saying you can't get protein from other sources, but you do need to make sure that you are strong and figure out what your genetics and your microbiome are giving you for that. So that's our little diet talk. We talk about sleep. Are you getting 7 hours? Stress is obviously incredibly important. We do a lot of coping strategies. We have a link to Psychology Today, which is where they can find people for talk therapy. We think that's so important. There's no reason why physical therapy, no stigma, talk therapy, big stigma. Let's just erase that right now. Our stress and our sleep, then exercise. We get a mix of people like that. Like where I work, because it's out of a gym, that's something I don't have to worry about. But are you getting at least 10 minutes of exercise every day? Like, are you getting some sort of endorphins? It doesn't have to be this crazy amount. And then ergonomics is something we talk about too, is not just seated ergonomics. You know, you're reclined to 110 degrees. You have a footrest to make sure that you can actually achieve that. You have your monitor at the appropriate height, but make sure that you can stand, that you have the ability to get a stand-up workstation. And then also you can lie down. Not everyone can at various times, but there are holders that can have tablets hang right over your head. Like, that's a really viable option and something that a lot of people could look into. So we like to take the ergonomics not just from like one standpoint. We really like to look at it as like sitting, stand, laying down, getting everything that you need to go. So awesome. Those are those exercise ergonomics. And then breathing. Breathing's like the number one thing, which carries us kind of over into the next, like into our PIP diagnosis model. So for the breathing, we give a lot of different strategies. I think there's a lot. You got your Wim Hof, you got your shut your mouth breathing. Everyone talks about diaphragmatic breathing. Yeah, is that something that you?
Shut your mouth breathing, or at least nasal breathing, was highlighted in jiu-jitsu with, we had another podcast guest, Garnett Strother. Anyway, we were training and we were discussing the benefits of nasal breathing. And there's a whole YouTube special with a guy named Steve Maxwell. He was one of the first gentlemen that brought kettlebells over to the United States.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So he now, are you familiar with him?
You might.
I am not actually.
I'd highly
tell.
Check him out. He's a fascinating story. I mean, he was one of the first kettlebell certified individuals with Pavel here in the States.
Oh, cool.
And then he's also a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he left his life as doing kind of a 9-to-5, and all he wanted to do was travel the world. He literally has one bag. He has like one of everything in a bag, and he goes all around the world and teaches mobility, mainly to jiu-jitsu schools. And he does strength training. He's older. He's like probably late 50s, maybe early 60s.
A wise man, but nasal breathing.
Yeah,
he speaks highly of it. And there's a lot of research, on a lot of research, and just anecdotally with my own, practice within BJJ and just training, even if I'm running up a flight of steps.
Right.
Different from
totally
most
panic breathing.
Yeah, the panic breathing.
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of breathing starts with big inhale, and that's mimicking a sympathetic response, which is tough. To be honest with you, if you want my little life hack on like nasal breathing or that minimalistic breathing, it's actually sit down in your shower and put where the shower is hitting, like right here and right here and right here, and it forces. That doesn't really help anyone for this podcast.
No.
Put it on top of your head, then slowly more towards your forehead and down your forehead. The more that hits the top of your head, you can breathe any way you want. You're never going to get any water snuck up into your nose. But as you start to get that where that water's coming more towards your forehead, if you were to take a big breath, so this is Steve's shower breathing.
That's great.
Trademark. Done. But try it, because I think it's actually really hard for a lot of people. I think it's hard to minimalistically breathe. I think that am I doing too much? Am I doing too little? You need some like feedback with that. Yeah. So in the shower, if you sit down and you just put the water stream like on your forehead, if you were to breathe really big in that moment, it would actually give you a little bit of trouble. You kind of get some water up your nose. And then as you get better at breathing less and less and less, you can have the water start to hit the front of your forehead, the bottom of your forehead, and even closer to your nose, and you still will be able to get enough air in. So try that out. It was a little hack for that, because I think it's really important to take your sympathetic and your parasympathetic systems and be aware of what you're doing in the moment. Like Wim Hof, you're breathing real big, love it. I would assume that for that, it's the vagus nerve stimulation of the holded exhale that is so important. But the way that he gets there is through something that's a little more on the sympathetic side. So interesting stuff.
I've tried Wim Hof. I tried, it was like about a month ago, but I followed his direction to make sure you're on a couch. But you get totally lightheaded. I mean, it's like you're hitting into another system. Yeah. It's very powerful.
And just love that dude. Oh my God. Don't you just want to like hang out with him, do
He's
whatever?
awesome.
My God, what a human. Giant.
Did you ever hear him on the Joe Rogan podcast?
No, I only saw him on Lewis House.
I sent that to Luke, and Luke loved it because he's this huge, nature and human connection, and he connects it with his method. And also he's just got great philosophies on movement and exercise. He's been moving all his life. And it's just really cool to hear it, because his perspective on things and his ability to say, like, the more you're connecting with nature on a regular basis, the more it's going to change your chemical makeup and make these things easier for you, like with the breathing. And
he's got some tons of research now too, where
he does with him.
You probably know about the
I know the things that he did, like injecting harmful.
Yes.
Good for you.
Yeah, no, good luck.
I'll be over here not with my infections, but
he's
good for him. No, he buys what he's selling. He embodies it.
I think Joe Rogan as well as Russell. I think he has one with Russell Brand, and that's another.
Those guys.
Very entertaining.
To be a fly on that wall. If they weren't in front of the microphones and just like out having a beer together, sweet God, where would that conversation go?
How would you? I've been exposed to different breathing practices, but definitely, for my own practice with patients, how do you kind of differentiate what technique to deliver to what patient?
Yeah.
How would you categorize some of these breathing techniques, and again, how to disseminate it to a person?
I think I think box breathing is just the easiest way to get into someone's brain. It doesn't even need to be because box breathing, you look and it's like 4-4-4, or you have a little bit longer exhale and different holds. It's really easy. I think that the buy-in is the most important thing. So therefore, I start really simple. Like if we're in the clinic and we're talking about breathing before we do something, that's obviously different from when they're at home laying on their couch 30 minutes before they go to bed. And I want to do something that's just going to make them feel that buy-in as quickly as possible. For me, I start with the box breathing and make it a little bit different. We call it our integrated breathing. So that 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold in general, to make it a little bit more applicable to them. And this is particularly with people that have like something going on in their brain, is on the inhale, have them think about what's on their mind. On the hold, think about the next logical step. On the exhale, relax your entire body. And on the hold of that exhale, just think about the most peaceful thing you can think of. So for me, it's surfing. For you, it might be being on a mountain. For you, it might be rolling around in a gym, whatever makes you calm.
It's very relaxing.
And think just totally, that's what that final exhale pause is. And that's what we've done, because you asked the same question that I asked. It's kind of like, well, I want there to be a little more than just the box. I think about the holds and how do I fit this for various people. And so we came up with our integrated breathing, which puts a nice little like spin on your regular box breathing with the inhale, what's on your mind, the whole next logical step, the exhale, just totally relax your whole body, and then have that hold be the most peaceful thing you can possibly think of. So that's just where we start. How about you? What's
I'll use 4-2-6 often, where inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 6, and then using some kind of sometimes it's a 2.5 pound weight, sometimes it's an iPhone, but the 4 seconds really having them direct it toward the abdomen, or crocodile breathing, where I have them face down and using that as a little bit of a biofeedback so they could actually feel the pressure. Or often when I'm doing some type of manual therapy, let's say to the neck or anywhere really, getting them aware of how they feel as they exhale. Let's say I'm on a trigger point and they exhale. That's a good way to buy in. I'm like, listen, I didn't do anything different.
Right.
You did.
Yeah.
So if your neck is tense, like mine's just spasmed up. I don't know if you noticed me twitching around. I just went into like, let me get down there, let all the accessory muscles go. But I usually use 4-2-6.
Okay.
And I find it to be helpful with the props.
Yeah.
And the buy-in is really letting the patient do it while they're in the office for about 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then when they come off, they're like...
Yeah, it's nice to put them parasympathetic before they walk out the door. We all know what lies outside the gym. Another thing that we're talking about is, and part of our systems, this is in the course, but this wasn't what we were going to talk about today, is just thinking about the connections between the diaphragm and between the pelvic floor, and just getting those two talking to each other, which we call it piston breathing, because you can really think about, like, as you expand through here, you're getting that diaphragm working, and the pelvic floor is eccentrically working, but then as you shift here, you're getting your obliques to work a little bit more, and that pelvic floor is a little more concentrically breathing. And we can talk about the way that we can cue them for the pelvic floor. Like, I want you to picture that the pelvic floor goes from between 4 different bones. It goes from your pubic bone to your tailbone, and it goes from your right sit bone and your left sit bone. And most people can kind of understand that and be cool. And then just say, hey, okay, and as you exhale, I just gently want you to draw your tailbone a little bit closer to your pubic bone, and I want you to then bring your sit bones closer to each other. And now that diamond's a little bit smaller, I want you to bring it gently up towards your head. Those tend to help people out. They start to understand they have a little bit more control over their body. And that's not a bad thing to do. I'm not saying I would do that for parasympathetic when they walk out, but that's more like a systems prep when they walk in. Like, when we're born, when we're babies, we can suck, which is going to get that pelvic floor going. We can breathe, which is going to get that diaphragm. We kind of have the ability to get our heads back to neutral, and we're looking all over the place. Why don't we start there when we systems prep people before we put them through a pillar prep and then their basic categories of exercise? So
key. Yeah, I mean, the way you phrase it, the most important, I usually tell people, hey, this is going to seem weird, but the simplest thing we could do is probably the most important, because, you see them...
We've forgotten how to do it all.
It's crazy.
So
it's amazing. I mean, my introduction to it's a very lower level kind of DNS course is the Original Strength. Have you heard of Original Strength?
No, I've not. Tell me, please.
They're awesome. So I took one course in 2013, I think, and it's just I believe it was 2 days, and they go over kind of like every rocking and rolling and crawling variation that you can, breathing. But they talk about this stuff, but I revisited it recently because I had a patient who was interested in learning about it for jiu-jitsu, and he moved out to Colorado, and so I wanted to send him a bunch of information. So just rereading everything, it came over in my head. I was like, we're trying to, for the most part, in a general sense, we're trying to get patients to their bodies to exactly almost like regress to this and be like, remember your body used to be able to learn these things just by interacting with the environment in itself. But now it's been kind of flooded with your adult life, which is nothing bad. It's just normal. It's like, you have to work, you have to deal with stress, you have to figure out how to pay your bills, you have to like endure a lot of stuff that's going to make you breathe different, it's going to make you act different, make you move a different way. But now we're trying to almost say to you, all right, now let's go backwards for a second. Let's see what your body's doing and see what it used to be able to do. And this is really cool.
And think about one of the first, within 3 months, if you will, that you start to get some thoracic extension through your T4 to T6. I'm not a pediatric therapist, but I can read textbooks. So I know that it's somewhere in that area, you know? And how crazy is it that one of the first thing that's, physiological flexion and things we already talked about, but then where we start to kind of extend early on as a human, that we're putting people in chairs for hours a day, that does the exact opposite. Like, of course we're
right.
What are you doing? This is crazy.
That's not a good regression, by the way.
No, that's bad. Let's just have everything stop right there because that's it. You're not going to be able to progress because you need that. Obviously, the way that things build, and this is like little tease for the rest of this episode, but I mean, our developmental dozen is taking our pillar prep and putting it towards human development. What? It's crazy, but that's how we look at it. And it is funny as you're developing, as I'm prepping these courses and taking more and things like that, it's just like, oh man, if we don't have that extension through there, it's hard for the rest of the dominoes to fall. Sure. How am I going to get all the way through to rotational stability and frontal stability and my glutes and everything firing? So I think it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we have to look at it both ways. It's like, to treat people, we have to take them back to that. But then also the way that we set up ourselves in our environment, a la our foundations of health and ergonomics and things like that, have to at least somewhat encourage the things that we're trying to get. So that's that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Those foundations are great. I was going to ask, one of my questions I had written down is like, how comfortable do you and your team feel delving into diet, sleep? Like, how do you kind of prescribe? We went over the breathing, we went over exercise, we understand that. But when you talk about diet and hydration, tons of information out there.
Of course, yeah.
How specific do you get?
Yeah, because that's not necessarily our role. And again, I'm the first one to admit that my ethics bias me. Like, I'm plant-based because it's ethical. And then I happen to lose 30 pounds and feel amazing, but that's not why I did it in the first place. And I'm not necessarily a person that I think that it biases me as I'm admitting, but I'm a healthcare practitioner and I want people to be healthy. Right. So I think that some of the quick things that with diet, I think comes alcohol. I think that that's an easy one to talk to people about. And no one's going to be like, no way. It's like, all right, well, yeah, maybe it is a little bit different.
Absolutely.
I think that from my functional medicine doctor, it was really interesting to hear her perspective, because we were talking about like, yeah, maybe I'm a little like gluten sensitive. And she's like, well, what about when you have crackers? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know. She said a lot of people actually have more trouble with specific forms of yeast than they necessarily do with gluten. It's not that they do or don't, that like all gluten sensitivity is really yeast sensitivity, but I was having trouble processing beer and I was having trouble with the amount of bread that I was putting into my body. Yeast is still the common denominator there along with gluten. So I think that that's an interesting one to talk to people about and see, depending on where they get their pastas from or the different kind of grains, and then which kind of yeast are going into which kind of breads that they're eating and how long they've actually been kind of like fermented. I guess the best way to say is like the most loaves that you're getting are produce massively, where if someone's making their own bread, that's going to be in there for 12 hours maybe. So it's already started to its own breakdown. Like the difference between eating having a kidney bean that's not really cooked all that way and one that is cooked in a pressure cooker, it can be very different. So prep really matters. So I'm usually happy to talk to people about that, and they're not very resistant. If they've heard it on Dr. Oz, they're all about it.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's amazing.
Right. It's not like you're setting up a meal plan for them, but you're just hearing their general habits.
Yeah.
Most importantly, making them self-reflect.
Right.
Making them self-reflect.
Yeah, and that's, I think with this, it's especially if they get the email with the insurance information.
Right.
Our previous guest that we had, Garnett, he talked about it too. I mean, we were making jokes about it, but he was describing it as like people are just like a head on a stick, just walking around, just like not, just trying to. And it's just like this lack of connection with themselves. So just that simple conversation is like, oh, well, let me think about this for a second. I never even thought about this.
Right, and I guess it's never a recommend. It's not necessarily recommendations. It's asking them questions that gets them to say, maybe there is something there.
Yeah.
The next thing though, I do like, and there's interesting research on this. But like talking to people about dairy, sometimes that matters, like I have a ton of anecdotal evidence. I'm not saying there's a ton of literature out there that absolutely supports that, but people are open to hearing about that. I can speak about my own mother who was having a terrible time because she was so nervous about osteopenia and osteoporosis that she would drink one big glass of milk every night. And we kind of were like, let's just see how that's a little bit different. And it made a big difference for her, but everybody's different. Right. So that, and then I would say like that you can talk to people about. I think that, again, anecdotally, just about the amount of consumption of meat that they're eating. Even if we're going like paleo, it's interesting. Like paleo talks about eating those during the Paleolithic era. Do you think that they we're saying like these are the things that you can eat, but it feels like a lot of people have the proportions way off in that.
Oh, for sure.
You're not going to order in the paleo. You're not going to order for breakfast, lunch, and dinner some like you're going to eat
once a day.
Yeah, exactly. Like
you're lucky.
That's the thing. Yeah. And why would you if there's fruit on a tree or there's that, why would you like I'm going to go fight that thing to go get like I'll just eat this. But then winter comes and it's a little bit different, and I understand that seasonally people probably shifted their diets, right, wrong, or applicable or not to us. I think it's worth having those conversations. Yeah. So to answer your question, a lot of it is just trying to help people acknowledge what is and what might not be involved and let them do their own homework on it.
Right.
So, but processed foods always like come out.
Yeah.
See you later.
And I mean, within that, the whole inflammatory diet, with everything we're discussing.
Right.
All right. Very cool.
Developmental dozen.
We're getting there. We still got to do PIP diagnosis.
PIP diagnosis.
I apologize.
No, please.
PIP?
So the PIP diagnosis model, this is where this comes from having students. I'm sure y'all have had a ton of students. And I think one of the big challenges is that a PT student comes out and I'm like, so tell me what's up with them. And the first thing they do is like supraspinatus tear. I would say grade 1, grade 2, and because it was an empty can test and I had a Neer's impingement that was tendon palpation, and I'm like, no, cool,
A+.
But like what? But what's up with them? Like what's really going on with them? And I found it annoying because I'm like asking questions and I seem combative and people then get defensive and I'm just like, how do I do this better? Like I don't want to be that guy who's like, no, like give me more of the story, give me more of the story. Like I need to give you the questions that I want answered to tell me that story. And so that's where the PIP diagnosis model came up with. So to start it from the beginning, it's pattern, impairment, pathology. Cool. But let's actually take it, and it's because it's palindrome, it's easy. Let's take it from exactly. Well, let's start with pathology, go to impairment, and then go to pattern. And that's where it's kind of, where it's a little bit special, is it because people come to you and we'll just take the most easy throwaway, like meniscus tear. So they're like, script, meniscus tear. I have a meniscus tear. It was confirmed on MRI. The meniscus is torn, people. It's torn.
Just if you haven't seen it,
like, exactly.
It's torn right there.
I brought the image with me.
Way, exactly.
You want to see it?
Exactly. Like I can open it up. Just like, cool.
I'm not going to change into shorts though.
No.
And then every clinician who's kind of like well-rounded is kind of like, cool. Well, nothing I can do about that. nothing I can do about that torn meniscus, one. And I think we all feel comfortable. But I think the adding on to like, you do realize you weren't born with a defective meniscus. Right. Like, there's no way that that's the problem, right? Just so we're all, and they're like, wait, what? But
it's torn.
But WebMD, but it's torn. I'm like, I care. I care because I care. Because I care about you as a human being. But I don't give about what your MRI says to get me to what I need to do to help you. I need to care because I need to protect certain things. I'm not just like MRIs. I think that they have a place for sure, and we need to understanding the structures that lie beneath can help guide us. But that's not going to help me towards the plan to actually get you out of here in the slightest.
Sure.
So that's where I was kind of like, let's take it back one. So that was where the I came from, which is impairments. I used to be and now I do more functional testing, but I still do. I mean, I clear out all logical impairments that could be contributing to a person's pathology. I'm not just checking hip external rotation, abduction, and extension strength for meniscus. I'm looking at it all, and that's where the pillar prep comes in, and that's where the crazy 8 comes in. But it's really important for people to understand that those are the things that got you here in the first place. But wait, there's more. You weren't born with a shoddy glute med. You weren't born with a stiff hip. You weren't born with whatever other physical impairment can come through. There's usually some sort of pattern that's driving that. I think that it's really interesting. We talked about this before, but people sitting at desks all the time end up driving a pattern that doesn't allow them to extend through their thoracic spine. Right. So let's even take a different diagnosis. Like, here's your PIP for a supraspinatus. Your pathology is supraspinatus tendinopathy. Your impairment is a stiff T-spine. Your pattern is sitting at your computer for 6 to 8 hours. So that's your PIP diagnosis model. Like, give me the whole story about the person. I want to understand everything. So that's where we kind of looked at it, especially with my students, where I was like, give me more. Ask more questions, ask better questions. Like, I need to ask you better questions so that you can ask them better questions to find out what's really going on. How do you sleep? Where's your mouse? I use my mouse on my left side. I think us putting human beings right rotated for a dominant amount of their life is not the best idea that we've ever had. So I actually I'm a righty, but I use my mouse on my left side. I've completely switched my hand. I eat with my left. I use my mouth on my left. I actually can write with my left now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Over the how long have you been using?
6 to 8 months.
All right. Wow,
yeah,
that's
but
powerful.
about like 3 to 4 months, it actually got semi-legible. And now if I'm journaling, depending on what's going on, I'll write what's on my mind on the right, which is with my good hand, and then on the left, I'll write what I learned, because I really want that driven home. Like, what I learned from this situation, do it with my left hand and make it a little bit better, and it like takes a little more time, but you know that it's really going in there.
That's so funny. I have a history of a really injured shoulder on my left side, and it kind of peaked out. I can't remember when it was, maybe 2012, 2013. So I started to experiment with my left side, doing all these things, but I didn't do the writing. So.
Switch Your Hand initiative started
about
5 months ago. Check us out on Instagram. It
awesome.
was huge. Exactly 0 people did it, but did we put it out there? Yeah, we did. No, Switch Your Hand. Switch
That'd be
your
a big
hand.
world.
I found it so
huge. You get better with people's names, right, Aaron?
Luke,
right? It's just funny. As soon as I say, I'll always say that. I'll be like, it even makes me better with names, and then I'll use the wrong name for them. And it's like this
like
idiot. Exactly.
Oh no, you got it. You got it down. That's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah, Switch Your Hand initiative, integrated health sciences. Boom. Challenge people to it too. Just do it with them. You can do it 30 days. Like, switch your hand with your eating. Switch your hand with your brushing teeth. Exactly. Like, build on it. Like, it's easy to brush your teeth, so start with that for 10 days, but carry that over. Then start to eat, and then the last 10 days you can start to write. And if you like it, then you can use your mouse on it. So
Very cool.
It's cool. Nice. So those are all your patterns and things like that. I think that they really do play a big part. Again, your impairments are your strengths and your range of motion, but they don't happen in a vacuum either. And your pathology, that's the thing that is just unfortunately giving you, that's what gets the people through the door, but that's not where it started. So take it back. So that's our PIP diagnosis model.
Awesome.
So In the eye, though, is the impairments. And that's where we're a little bit, this is maybe where we even put more of our brand. And as I'm saying, it's like PIP diagnosed well is totally us. Like that's not something, I don't think anyone thinks that looking at pathology, impairments, and patterns is something new and improved. But talking about them all together every time is unique and is something that we came up with and something that we're proud of. So the eye is probably the most fun thing that we'll talk about. Again, that impairments. And for us, the thing we'll talk about right now is our pillar prep. So do you guys think about pillar prep in general? Is this a word that is common in your vernacular? And I mean that like wholeheartedly, because most people go dead eyes when I talk about it.
Yeah, no, I don't usually use it like this, but I'm assuming it's just like the basics that every human should be able to, have some proficiency in.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's, so we first came across pillar prep after Carl went to Exos for the first time. So they started talking about pillar prep. And I remember exactly kind of like how we're having this I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah. It's like if I'm just a regular person, I have abs. And if I'm like working with a trainer, like a regular trainer that like New York Sports or whatever, I have like a core, and like that's like core, that's right. It. Then I got a core, and now you're saying this pillar prep thing, and I'm just like, what are you talking about now? But I totally get it. In fact, I remember looking back after we talked about core, and like when we learned core in school, for me it was like pelvic floor, lumbar multifidus, diaphragm, and transverse abdominis. But then as I started reading a little bit more strength textbooks, it was like really anything in your torso can be considered your core. And I was like, I kind of like that, but it's a little too vague for me. Right. I'm not totally comfortable saying that in front of a large group of people. And then that's it. So then when Carl came back and was talking about pillar prep after Exos and talking about just getting this area kind of like from your shoulders to like your thighs going, I was like, okay, there's something there. And the way that it was kind of described is like 360, getting everything kind of working. And I thought that was cool, but I found that very hard to implement into practice. I hope that someone would just give me pillar prep exercises so that I could do them, so that I didn't have to think about what was going on. And like, that's one less thing I have to worry about. But then once you start teaching, and specifically we teach anatomy, we realized that we needed to give people boxes to check and buckets to put things in. Right. So for us, for our pillar prep, and University of Colorado actually has the best definition of like pillar prep definition. And it's the muscles that insert into the shoulders, the muscles that insert into the hips, and everything in between. And I thought that was a really cool way to slice it up and make it good. But again, that's abstract. If I tell a new therapist or even a somewhat seasoned trainer that's the pillar prep, so now go prep that person, that's going to take them half an hour, they're going to overshoot the landing probably and not totally understand what we're going for. So we're lucky because, like I said, we teach every single week. We teach to the trainers at Gotham. So we were lucky that when we were talking about pillar prep for ourselves and for our patients, we also were teaching anatomy at that time. And what did we happen to be at? Ranges of motion. Why do we need to go any further than that? If we hit all of the major ranges of motion of the trunk, the hips, and the scap and shoulder, I think we're pretty darn good. Absolutely. So our pillar prep definition takes it more than just the muscles that insert into those joints, the shoulders down to the hips, and then that's it. We broke it down into muscle groups. So you have your trunk flexors, extensors, rotators, side benders, your hip flexors, extensors, abductors, adductors, external rotators, internal rotators, and you got to be able to stabilize your scap and shoulder anterior and stabilize your scap and shoulder posterior. That's your 12. That's important. And if you hit that, and you can hit that really easily with someone, because there's a lot of you side plank, congratulations. You got your trunk side benders and your hip abductors. Boom, congratulations. You're doing, let's say, elbow taps. You're getting your anti-rotators, your trunk flexors, and you're getting your anterior scap stabilizers. Like, cool. Like, you don't need one for every single one. No. But if you're a new trainer, if you're new to this, do it. Just do one. Just take time. And if you'd really want to learn more about this, obviously we're going to be going through multiple ways to get this at the course, like the lengthy way, but then also that kind of the quick and dirty one, right. And just making sure that we cover all of our bases through there. So that was where, for us, taking something that I found challenging, again, benefiting from my non-hyperintelligence was really nice in this scenario because I needed buckets. If I was going to use this for myself, I needed buckets. I needed to think of it as a circuit breaker model. And that's really how we look at the nervous system. It's like you have your circuit box, which is your brain. And these are the 12 most important circuit breakers that you need to make sure are all tripped on. Boom, 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 boom. Because these are going to all mix together. And that's probably where you see it, is if you test these. And this is how, sincerely, for any patient who comes in, I already have it written out on the board that I'm going to be going over these 12 with them. I have trunk flexors, extensors, rotators, side benders, hip flexors, extensors, external rotators, internal rotators, abductor, adductor, scap anterior, scap posterior, and have all that written on our little board before they even walk in so that they realize, like, this is the root of your problem. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the patterns, like I said, the PIP diagnosis model, but right now, today, I want to know where your impairments are because they travel together. Your glute med isn't defective. There's something that's not happening, some sort of precursor that needs to end up helping to happen first so that that can fire. It may be your obliques. It may be your adductor group. It may be your hip internal rotators. It may be your hip extensors. I don't know. And that's one thing where it's fun is like, as I'm prepping this, I'm not giving you any sort of formula, but you do need to look at these 12 people, right. 12 things on every person that walks through. And you better be able to tell me by the time that you walk out what the 3 or 4 are that are the worst, because they're playing with each other. There's no doubt that if they don't have good anti-rotation stability and their glute med isn't working all that well, they're connected. Absolutely. And in general, and I don't know why I'm totally happy saying this, that like the lack of anti-rotation stability doesn't let the glute med go. I'm not making rules for anyone for anything, but I do feel very comfortable saying that in general, I think a lack of anti-rotation strength will inhibit glutes. I don't know why. I don't particularly care why, because I know that if I can treat them as a cluster of, let's say, their 3 or 4 biggest impairments, which is also their lowest hanging fruit, if I really blast those in different sequences, if I can raise the tide, I'm going to have to raise that tide together. If I can get their anti-rotators up a little bit, I know that I'll get that much out of the glutes. And so that's how we look at everything. Now, if we do want to look for a sequence, that's where we get into the developmental dozen. But when I'm purely just looking at it, the first thing when they come in is I need to walk out understanding what their physical impairments are in their pillar. In their pillar prep, where are they deficient? Where are they lacking in their trunk, their hips, and their scap shoulder? And once I understand that, then I can use my developmental, and that's where the developmental dozen comes in. Like, then I can start to use my, well, I know that in typical human development, this plays off of this, but in general, the underlying answer is if I can raise the tide of these lowest hanging fruits together, that's going to work really well for them. And I have to raise them together. I can't just give someone a whole bunch of glute med exercise if their glute med isn't working. That's not the problem. They weren't born with a shoddy glute med. You have to get at the root. And I think that this is the root of the problem, and making sure that we understand that they don't happen in isolation and that I need to get some things turned on to turn on other things to give it a better foundation.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great stuff. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is everything that's important.
I think so. No, it is. And so I came up with this before I even cracked a book, and now we're going to go into the developmental dozen, but I cracked a book on childhood development. I knew that this was worth it. You know, we go down and do a medical mission every year in Ecuador.
Yes.
And once I heard for the 900th time, one of the clinicians down there who actually works in PED say, yo, you don't control the hips, you don't lock down that pelvis, you don't control the kid. Like, trust me, if you can get those hips locked into that chair, that child's tone's going to totally change and everything's going to start working. So we had already taught the anatomy, this chronology of how it kind of went. It's like pillar prep, cool concept, don't know how to use it. Okay, now I think I understand it. It's still really hard to use and wouldn't feel comfortable teaching it. Then we taught anatomy and we're like, oh, okay, well, I can't quantify this. And then the next thing that we did was like, well, is this even worth anyone looking at? And then when we were down for a medical mission in Ecuador, it was like, this is so important. This is exactly how it needs to be. But then the next thing that we went to was like, all right, so now that we know that it can relate to pediatrics, how do we make it even just a little bit better? I don't think you're wrong ever if you just go trunks, hips, scap, and shoulder. You're totally fine. If that's how you want to do it and it's just easy, and a lot of trainers do that just because it's a lot easier, that's how they go down. But I don't think that it's a bad idea to think about, Lee, what you were saying is that typical human development. So that's where we came up with the developmental dozen. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but I will give you some kind of framework where in general, we do develop a little more in the sagittal plane first, and then you can start to have a little bit of rotation, like the transverse and the frontal planes kind of come around the same time. They start to work together. So when we wanted to do our pillar prep just a little bit better and a little bit different, we took the typical milestones, and again, different textbooks can give you a little bit different answers, but in general, we took the general progression that humans develop, and then we made our pillar prep modeled after that. And doesn't mean that sometimes I don't just go all trunk and then all hip and all scap. That's still so much better than what most people are getting. But to give it just our little bit of our own brand, we made it the developmental dozen, and we made it modeled after human development.
Very
so for
cool.
that, you're gonna have to take the course.
Right.
That's our thing. So that's
cool.
kind of how we look at everything. I think that those are the things that we've come up with or we've snagged. Like obviously Foundations of Health, we didn't come up with ourselves. But those are the things with that Foundations of Health, the PIP diagnosis model. And as for that impairment, I think the pillar prep is definitely the thing that we do a little bit differently. And for us, it's been really helpful. I love manual. I still have, it's me, it's part of me, but like I'll always be manual therapy certified from University of St. Augustine. I will still bust in my hump to get those letters after my name, and found for the right person, that is really helpful. But in general, I've shifted much more towards caring about their pillar prep than their P to A on their spine.
Got it. That was my next question to you. Like if someone came from a purely manual world and they saw this, like, well, where's joint mobility? Where is joint mobility? Where is, norms?
Sure. And that's fine. And we didn't talk about it. And it's as good a time to talk about it now, but like our Crazy 8, which is funny. It's like I feel like I'm using such an outdated, like Crazy 8 is a card game, Crazy 8s, but I feel like maybe we gotta change the name, because I feel like kids these days are just like, what are cards? I'm sorry, is there an app for that? Like our Fortnite 8, like I don't even know, that's like 14, but either way, our Crazy 8 is a little bit closer to what you're talking about. Gotcha. So that's our 8 functional tests that we use. And there's a little bit of overlap with the pillar prep, but if I can only do one, I promise you I'm doing pillar prep, because the Crazy 8 is still going to be victim to the pillar prep. So for our Crazy 8, we're doing, and again, feel free, if you're not familiar with any of these, you probably be a good person to take the course. But you have your cowboy sit, you have your 90-90 shin box, then straight from the pillar prep, you have your hip extensor strength and your hip flexor strength. So important. Anti-rotation, single leg stance, cervical range of motion, wall angels. Like those are the things that we're looking at functionally. And that's actually not that we don't do that with every single patient, but we do teach that to the trainers as their assessments, and it's a really good way. So you do get a little bit of joint mobility. Like maybe I'm not taking the hip and seeing if it can posteriorly glide, but if I can see that it's going into internal rotation in their shin box, cool. We catch a lot of the things. We want to take all the physical impairments that we see that happen so much. Like if you have a really stiff first toe on either side, that's problematic. Drop them into a cowboy sit. And it's not just me being like, oh, look at this. Look, there's nothing here. It's definitely. Do you feel how stiff that is? It's so stiff. As stiff as I've ever felt. It's like, here's a cowboy sit. Jump in it. Where do you feel? What do you feel? I don't ask any other questions on that. I don't want to guide them towards anything. I want to bias them towards anything. Where do you feel? What do you feel? That's it. Oh, you feel that in your big toe on your right and on your left? Well, that's a problem. You're in a shin box and you feel it on the internally rotated side on your left? That's a problem. You feel like you can't get straight up? Cool. You can't do 5 rotating planks rolling through. Like, you have your elbow taps. We kind of added a little bit to make it a little bit more so that we could get a little bit more of the side bending. So we actually shifted from our original Crazy 8. We took out our elbow taps and we put in a rotating plank plus, so that we could get a little bit more abductors and side benders in there as well. But if you can't rotate through a plank from a side plank to a front plank, raise one arm, other side plank, you got real problems. And so then we go through there. C-spine range of motion is obviously really important. single leg stance isn't very specific, but it's pretty sensitive. And this is like one other little anecdote, but we've taught this to trainers and we've also taught this to yoga instructors. And it's just so funny because people in the strength world would probably be like, oh, yoga instructors, like they're so flaccid and they can't do whatever. It's like, everyone's different. Like, look at your buddy over there, what he's doing.
He can't move.
Exactly. Like you can't really look at things. I think people, when their biases are showing, tend to pick the worst rather than the best of what exists out there. But I mean, we went through our Crazy 8 with a whole group of trainers and with a whole bunch of yoga instructors. And it was just kind of funny because maybe the yoga instructors had a little bit more trouble when they were doing some of the, specifically like anti-rotation, they were having trouble with. Like in that portion of the rotating plank, that was actually back when it was just elbow taps. They were having a little bit of trouble with this, but their wall angels were a little bit better. Their cowboy sit was better than the trainers, yada, yada, yada. But the biggest discrepancy was crazy. It was a single leg stance. So we do it eyes open, 20 seconds, eyes closed, 10 seconds. And we have them in like a 90-90 position with their opposite leg and plug their fingers really hard into the ground, just trying to eliminate everything that could possibly go wrong. And then it was just so funny because the trainers are just like, whatever. And we got to the yoga instructors. We just happened to teach them after, and they just nailed it. Like it was beautiful. And I was so proud. And I think I started we threw them off a little bit, but I was like, yeah, like that's right. That's how you train. So you got to do them all. Take all your Crazy 8, take your pillar prep, go for it. You know, from this podcast, you have enough to kind of like go and run. But if you want to kind of see it in action, like we pick one of each of our pillar prep where it's almost like a tester size. I hate that name. It's such a stupid friggin' name. You ever think of something you're like, we're going to say this and make fun of ourselves all in one fell swoop. But we have our tester sizes because everything's got to be functional. So it's an exercise that's also a test. But we'll give you the best ones. And also in our movement science, then we take it for the rest of our basic categories of exercise. Like pillar prep is the first of the basic categories of exercise. Then your squat, your hinge, your lunge, your push and your pull, which are vertical and horizontal. And then your locomotion. And then we added in rotation to ours. Like, you know, I think a lot of people have like 6 or 7. Like we really think the pillar prep is really important on the front side. But we can't neglect rotation. Like rotation has to be in there. Maybe that's just your finishers and things like that. But you need to do your trunk, either anti-rotation or rotation work in the beginning as part of your pillar prep. But it's not a bad way to finish you off as well with some finishers. So that's kind of how we carry it all the way through. And that's how we roll.
That's so cool.
That is very cool. I mean, it's very, no pun intended, but integrated. That's the name. But name. Just how everything kind of connects. And again, as you said, I think for trainers, therapists, this is all should be pretty recognizable for anybody.
Totally.
Right. So,
with patients, do you put this on like a board and then you say that we're going to go through this? Oh,
yeah. Before they walk in, so that they know that this is not negotiable. But the last one I went to just kind of rubbed it on the first session and it felt better. Like, and listen, someone comes in with like a hot disc in their neck. I'm not going to put them through this shit. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. But I would say 85% of the time, it'll already be written. I'll just 15% of the time I'll be like, you know what? Yeah, you're probably right.
I'm not going to
don't stress. Day one, yeah, but no, like seriously, day one for almost everyone that I can think of, other than that person who has a neck radiculopathy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and they're just crying because it's killing them. But yeah, no, everyone gets this. And then if we want a little bit more, we'll start to mix in the Crazy 8s later because we don't want to overwhelm them. 20 tests on the first day would be kind of tough. I find the pillar prep to be more at the root of their problems. So we hit that. And then obviously talk to them and like, rule out certain things. Not like I don't do special tests like everyone else, but in general, I want them to see this first so they understand where a little bit more about the origins of their problem. We can talk about the patterns before that, but in that PIP diagnosis model, these to me are the most important impairments. And then you can get more local, have them do like a Z press to see how their strength is. Like I wonder with you, with your left shoulder, like if you do a bottoms up Z press, what's that going to look like on both sides?
It's terrible.
Yeah, just, it's no problem. But so you can obviously get a little bit more specific with stuff, and I think it's important to get the local, but these global, really, really important.
I think it's great from a practice perspective too. I mean, obviously you have X amount of years of experience, a ton of continuing ed, so there's a lot of information, but this kind of organizes it for you. So, you're focusing on your patient. But how you approach that patient's not necessarily going to change. I mean, it's going to change, but objectively, you have your system, basically.
Right. And for now, I mean, that's a thing. And also you said, like, trainers can look at this. Like, trainers, if you do any of the words that I said about the ranges of motion, you can also go on our website under our exercise science, learn FIRE. So FIRE is our functional integrated rehabilitation exercise. That's our thing. That's it. You know, everything's functional, everything's integrated. We left rehabilitation because we could have changed that to resistance. Like, we definitely played around with that a lot, but the rehabilitation I thought was important to make sure that everyone knew that the risk reward on these things was just in the right place. So we left that in through there. And then exercise. So click on Learn FIRE and then click through. And at the top, there's a pre-course manual. That pre-course manual that we give out to all of our trainers and yoga instructors is up there. So if you're not familiar with what trunk flexion looks like or trunk extension or what hip external rotation looks like, that's all on our website. So you can start to play around with those a little bit yourself. So I just wanted to know, like, everyone can, even if you're just a true student and you want to learn more as a quote unquote patient, you can check out a lot of this stuff on your own and kind of see where you think. Now realize when I'm talking about the pillar prep, I'm talking about the abilities of the muscles that do that, not that range of motion, just to totally set that out there. But yes, in general, anyone can kind of pick up this podcast, go on our website and get a little bit better handle on what their body's doing.
What's the feedback from patients? I mean, with the educational piece, because as you said, you know, there's certain people here in New York, they want to be fixed. They don't necessarily want to. They feel like they don't want to learn, and obviously that's not a smart move. But you know, they don't want to learn. And how do you approach that? Like when the person says, "Rub me here," or how do you approach?
I think I'm one of the worst people to answer that question because because I worked hard throughout my entire career. Most people are coming word of mouth. They somewhat know what they're in for, and they're already viewing me as the expert. Again, I'm not saying I'm special. I'm just saying I've been around long enough that when people come, they already I get, as the owner of the company and as someone who looks like they've been doing this for a little bit, I don't get a lot of pushback anymore. Like last week, I had someone who almost started crying because her ART person had hurt themselves, so they couldn't do it. So that's why she found me.
Got it.
And I just simply said, if that was working, you wouldn't be here. So let's just try something different. Right. And she was okay with it. And then once we got her into these things, and seriously, like her hip abductors were so weak. And I was like, do you think my thumb is going to change that? It's not. We got to work our way out of it. And then explaining everything. And again, like I have the honor that I get to teach. So I can click into that education real quick. And that education voice sounds so good. So compelling. You can never argue with this guy.
No.
Clearly, he knows what's going on. And he just said he's going to be interviewed for a podcast. He's incredibly brilliant and attractive. So it's like,
it's great.
You know, whatever it is. But I hate to say this, but I am one of the worst people to answer that question because I'm at a point where I have a wait list most of the time. If someone gives me that much trouble, they're not going to be with me for very long, and that's totally cool. But people tend not to give me trouble, I think, because I educate the fuck out of them. Right. That's where it comes in. Once if it's written on through there and saying like, no, we teach this. Like we not only teach this to trainers, but we also teach it to other therapists. They're willing to give it 2 or 3 tries, and if you can just get them to buy in enough to see how weak they are in one out of these 12 tests. You got them.
Right. Right. And your referral sources, too, because most of these trainers might have some work done or taken a course. So, again, that word of mouth, I agree with you. That word of mouth, you know, you become the expert.
Right.
Very quickly. So,
are you, out of curiosity, are you keeping stats? I'm so...
On our patients and on the pillar?
Yeah, just like general stuff like diagnoses who come in and then like what they do.
They're there. Yeah. I have never compiled them, but I have, because I write this all on a glass. Where we're at, it's a semi-private studio, so there's a glass wall. Cool. I just write right on it, and then at the end I take the white pillow, put it behind what I wrote. They take a picture and send it to me so I know that they have it and then I have it. Oh, cool. So I actually do have... I have everyone's pillar prep, where they're at, and I obviously have their diagnosis.
Got it.
that'll be a fun little project when I have my next intern.
Right,
Like,
exactly. Let's take a look at this.
Something with this, yeah.
I think it would be cool just to, because this is a very, what you're doing, what seems like you're doing is you're taking all these fantastic systems and then you're taking your own experience and you're taking the education that you've had and you're putting it all together into a new system.
Right.
So that in terms of, we're always trying to think like of the effectiveness and things like that.
Yeah, functional outcome stuff and whatever we even could if we could do it all, like here's your diagnosis, here with the impairments. Mm-hmm. Because we know your impairments, we know what we focus on. But in general, still, even if let's say that someone comes in and out of this, they have trouble rotating to the right and they have a left hip flexor that's weak and the right glute max isn't firing or right hip extension isn't great. Mm-hmm. We're still hitting all of the pillar prep every time we go, but we may start and end with that. We may mix a little bit more. We may sequence the rotators, then to the hip flexors, then to the extensors, then back to the hip flexor, then back to the glute, then back to the rotators. We might take it all through there. So I would be curious if you did look at all of our notes that we take on everything, how well. I know that we honor our model. I'm just curious if our notes would reflect what we actually did in that day. But I am curious, even just saying like, this is how we look at it. Here's for these diagnoses, this is what we came up with. Mm-hmm. And then just if we did a little bit more functional outcome stuff, saying, I'm sure that there's norms that we could compare ourselves to.
That'd be awesome.
For different diagnoses and see how most people improve.
Yeah.
So that's all that. Do you mind if we talk for 2 seconds? It's just like one thing while we have the floor, but just about billing practices. I know this is like a total shift from what we just did.
No,
you thought we were going to be talking
about
something.
No, it's all relevant, man.
Yeah.
It's what we deal with 20. Yeah.
Well, it's just something that I felt like I needed to say on a greater stage because I heard it on a greater stage and what I heard was wrong. So I had heard, and I wouldn't give any specific names of which podcast, but a very, very highly regarded podcast the interviewer was interviewing someone who ran multiple practices, and they were talking about billing practices for out of network. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I had always heard like, you're out of network, so you don't have any contracts with the insurance companies, so you can kind of do whatever you want, whatever. Like that's it. And that was more or less what was shared with the podcast that I know thousands and thousands of particularly new physical therapists were listening to. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is worth saying that is wrong. Right. How you treat the person off the street, what you bill that person, what you collect from the patient, and what you bill the insurance companies have to be the same. So It was interesting. I went and talked to some billers and some lawyers after hearing that and was kind of like, is this true? I mean, that sounds great. So what was the biggest soundbite that I think is important for all the people who might be starting their own practices or anyone who owns or may own a clinic is the kind way that the lawyer phrased it to me. He said, listen, if you ask accountants and you ask tax attorneys the same question, you're going to get two different answers. Mm-hmm. The accountants will tell you what's common practice. The tax attorney will tell you what the law says. The law says that if I have someone come in and I am charging them until they meet their deductible $200 out of pocket, I have to bill the insurance $200. Yeah. But that is not what this podcast with this resource was sharing exactly. Right. And I think it's important for people to know that. Again, that's just like one little practice management. If you listened before, you heard a lot more practice management stuff, but I wanted to make sure that got out there. Also, this is just as good a time to mention, but you can schedule one-on-ones consulting with me. That is like, this sounds like a shameless, but it's the only time to really mention this, is I have now shifted my schedule to have availability for consulting. So if that was something that was a surprise to you, you might want to spend 1 hour on the phone with me so we can go through everything. And most of them are things where I'm learning from where I thought it was this and it's this, and I can tell you the whole backstory so it doesn't seem like I'm just saying like I'm not just regurgitating information that I got from other podcasts. I'm telling you from talking to my lawyers and to accountants and things like that. So feel free to take me up on that. It's really easy. You just scroll down to the bottom of our website. It says click here to make an appointment, make a one-on-one business consultation with Steve, and just fill out the paperwork and you're all good.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
With that information, have you ever heard of anybody being chased down for that reason? I mean, has that surfaced?
And that was what the lawyer was really kind about. He's like, listen, the chances of you having trouble as a small practice are small. And not like I was asking particularly like, can I do this? Is this cool? But but he was kind enough to expand it.
Right.
So the way that it would go down, he said in his experience, is low likelihood that you would end up getting audited. But if you did get audited, what would end up most likely happening is they would cap you at whatever level you were collecting from the patient for them to meet their deductible for the rest of your time as a therapist. So you can never raise your rates.
So they would that would be going forward for as long as you're in practice.
For as long as you're in practice and as long as they're still a company. Wow. So let's say they found out that you were charging the person $100, but you were billing the insurance $200.
Gotcha.
Easy numbers. Congratulations. The most that you could ever get paid out from Aetna or whoever for the rest of your career is 100. Is making $100 their number that they're willing to cover is reasonable and customary.
Right, because that's what you charge.
Exactly.
Got it.
So it was really interesting, but you also could end up getting prosecuted. Again, small likelihood of audit and small likelihood that they would be like, now we're going to spend more money. Like in general, their quick fix is to say, and just cut you down, cut you off. Right. But could you end up having trouble? Sure. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is, right now you're starting to see conglomerations. You're starting to see businesses approaching smaller businesses, bigger businesses approaching smaller businesses about mergers and acquisition. You got to have your books right. You don't want to build something on a shaky structure, like on a shaky foundation. So I think that it's really important to do things the right way.
Absolutely.
Is this let's say you're a PTO opening a practice, and you start to bill out a network and you start to get the paperwork for the insurance companies. Is this something that would be in that either signing on to, it's not really a contract, but there's just basic billing practices that go out. Would this something easily given to us as a PT, or do we have to kind of ask about it in general?
Are you saying is in general, when you start working with insurance companies, somewhere in the fine print is this listed?
Correct.
I don't believe so, because it's the law. Almost like LE, like Legal 101, when it comes to billing, is that everyone needs to be treated the same.
Got it.
And so that means that if you come in off the street, and this is our biggest problem with healthcare, is that people don't abide by these rules. Do you know what I'm saying? If everyone posted their billing fee publicly, and every insurance company knew what that was, and every human knew what that was, we would have a lot less problems. I don't claim to know how to fix this unbelievable problem that we have with healthcare in this country, but I do know that, and as much as this wouldn't work in our favor if we were some of the people that were billing, like max billing, if you will. I think that's a proper term, like max billing. Then it wouldn't. That would be problematic for us because we couldn't abide. But if you're one of those people, you're not abiding by the by the law anyway. So no, I don't believe, because I never signed an in-network contract. All I did to become an out-of-network provider registered for Aetna or for Blue Cross Blue Shield is I just sent them like a W-9 exactly. Right. And then they never sent anything back. They just paid some claims. Right. If you're in network, it's totally clearly stated, and it's so easy. But this is actual just legal practices, is that everyone has to be treated the same way.
This is interesting because someone that I know that is close to us, they were having a discussion about it, and right now after our last podcast, because there was like a quick brief of mentioning this with both Eric and I, I talked to him about it, and he didn't know it at all, and I think he looked into it more and more. I haven't talked to him again, but
well, you can ask a lot of people. You can ask a lot of billers, and they're gonna. It's the accountant versus the tax attorney thing, though. If you ask billers, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, you can max bill. You have a contract, whatever." And it's like, well, no. I mean, you could do anything you want,
right.
But
if you want to abide by,
would an attorney tell you that is how the law is written? No. Right. And that's what I think is kind of interesting. And you can even ask lawyers that aren't specialized, and they might even say like, oh, no, I mean, yeah, you don't have a contract, whatever. Like, you didn't sign anything, whatever. Don't even worry. But no.
But that's a super important thing. I think even now, because the last several people we've had in here who had their own businesses, trainers, PTs, whatever it is, one thing is becoming really sure is that we could no longer be, in Jason Kapnick's word, divorced from what the costs are for medical services. And I think PT is one of those things right now. The direction of it is going to be kind of up in the air in the next couple of years. You know, there was this article about Medicare for All and how it could bring down hospitals, even though it would give more health care to more people. And it has to be looked at in a holistic way. But I think in the end, it's going to be super important for us to be a little bit more diligent with this stuff.
And it sounds like you two actually probably know more than I do on this. What do we think, if there were a Medicare for All, how would that affect our practice? Or would it even, if, you know, let's say like Australia, this is how it used to be a while ago, but let's say that you were your own boss. And let's say that they would pay $100 for physical therapy sessions. You could charge whatever you wanted. You're just only going to get $100 back from the government, exactly, from the system. So if you want your rate to be $150, then for me to come to you, would have to pay you $50. That seems very common sense and totally fine, frankly. Mm-hmm. But I never get the sense that common sense and fine is going to be what's going to go on in the United States with what we have going on. No. So do you have any sense of where of what Medicare for All might look like to me PTs, as a out-of-network provider for physical therapy?
From my understanding, it would probably be what Medicare would pay, which is pretty high for PT services. So this article that I was reading in the New York Times that was recent was more about like surgeries, medicine, and how it affect hospitals, because hospitals vary their charges so much. Oh my God! Mm-hmm. And so the ones that would obviously veer towards the lower end would be Medicare reimbursement. Right. And then those procedures wouldn't be really available anymore, or they wouldn't have the staffing for it. So they'd have to get rid of a lot of like nurses and doctors. So I think for us, since we're specialized, I think it wouldn't really affect us in the outpatient world.
Right.
But I don't know that for sure. I mean, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like the question I was asking before was like, if they let us, because right now, you know, like if you wanted to take Medicare, you can't ask for additional funds from that patient.
No way. Yeah.
And so, but I wonder if we go Medicare for All, does that stay, or would that get expanded? Meaning like, okay, now you actually can, because if not, this system is going to create a total divide, and I don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I feel like it's happening. The divide is already happening, right? I mean, most of our patients can pay for out of pocket.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah, very lucky, very lucky. We live in a bit of a bubble in terms of from the country's perspective, right? But I don't know how that's going to affect us. I mean, sadly, that bubble has isolated us from any of those changes, right? And I'm very thankful for it. But it really sucks because there's so much of the population that would benefit from this, and you know, we know the benefits of healthy people, and if everybody abided by the pillar prep it up, a little plug, I think to be a better place. But it's going to be some interesting times. But it's sad because I recall working in an in-network clinic at a time, and I thought to myself often that I was like, wow, this person's never gotten this level of care. You know, this one-on-one 30-minute. They're there for an hour and a half.
Right.
And, you know, that I kind of miss that. But at the same token, you know, I do want it's survival, right? We all got to survive somehow. It's super complex, and I don't know. Like you said,
I don't have a good answer.
No way. Don't have a good answer.
But smarter people figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, in the meantime, we're living here in New York City. We're a bit isolated.
Yes.
Very lucky.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, right now, I've said this on the podcast, and I don't know if you know, but my fiance is an acupuncturist. And so you mentioned a little bit with acupuncture and dry needling and physical therapy. There's some tide kind of rolling right now in the acupuncture profession. I don't know if you've heard, but a couple of board members have stepped down from the acupuncturists. There was a new, I don't even know what to call it, but there was an email that was sent out that basically was supporting, from the acupuncture board, supporting physical therapists doing dry needling, which was strange.
Interesting.
And so a lot of the acupuncturists are wondering what's happening at the top. But my fiance has different theories in terms of where the future is going to be. But in the end, it seems going to be a little bit less, traditional acupuncture and a little bit more dry needling with physical therapists and/or dry needling, quote, with acupuncturists. But it's all kind of stemming from the same thing that we're talking about now. This idea that they're trying to find low costs for conservative management, and they're trying to find almost like a streamline. It's a lot easier for them to streamline something that's already in the system than it is to go outside the system, which acupuncture kind of is.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean?
So saying that almost, instead of being totally against dry needling, being like, actually, that's kind of cool because it's already as part of the healthcare system. So when things switch, we may as well be on that train.
Yes,
It will be easier for us to catch that train because that train has already been built.
Right. Yeah, they already put those
really
things in places. Yeah, so it's I don't know what's going to happen to it, but I feel like there is value in traditional acupuncture treatment versus the idea of dry needling.
But might be also buying like dry needling physical therapists, again, part of the establishment already. But there's certain individuals that hear acupuncture or Eastern medicine and they don't understand, right? They have their own perception of it, and they're trying to incorporate it because they know the benefits. That's for sure. I mean, science is.
That's the thing, and it to almost bring us full circle back to what we started about. Mm-hmm. It used to be combined with movement science. They were ahead of the game on that.
It's incredible.
Then the way that and I don't know what it looks like in the Eastern Hemisphere, but in the Western Hemisphere, I mean, no one gets up out of an acupuncture treatment and starts doing Tai Chi
no way.
right away.
No way.
So it will be nice when things hopefully all come back together.
Yeah,
as our conversation did.
We're part of the movement. So
yeah.
Ooh,
part of the
movement.
Man, I have to say, after our first podcast together, I left here kind of like, wow. That was, to be honest with you, I was like, you are an incredible practice manager and plus a great clinician. And I feel the same way right now after this.
It's a lot of info, but it's a lot of info that it all connects. So that's
we like to integrate stuff.
It's awesome, man.
No, but I walked out being like, thank you for letting me tell my story. Like, thank you for letting me tell an anecdote about my great aunt. Do you know what I'm saying? You let me give the context, not just the conclusions. And that was cool. And this felt the same way. And I can't be more grateful. So thank you so much for letting me share the things that I care the most about.
Thank you.
That was great. So we're going to, I think on the show notes at least, post most of the stuff. But we do have a website.
Awesome.
Yes.
And I'd like to maybe take like some screenshots of whatever you feel
100%.
is cool, and we could put it on the website with the show, and definitely we'll be posting this YouTube video too. So,
and we'll also with the website. Anybody interested in taking any of Steve's courses, it'll be on his.
Link it up.
Yep.
So June is the
there's
first
8
one?
spots left for the movement science.
Sweet.
This morning.
June.
It's at Flex.
June 8th and 9th at Flex Physical Therapy. They're awesome. There's 2 Flexes actually in the city. They're both awesome. I know the owners of both of them. Cool. Flex. It's in Midtown. Just you can link straight through to it. But it's just the 8th and 9th. It's a Saturday Sunday course in June. So we'll be covering a lot. We'll be covering not only just like our pillar prep, our systems, but then we're also going to go through squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, locomotion, rotation. So you'll get everything. Just the cueing that we've gotten over the last. I'm sure you know how to cue a hinge. I'm sure you know how to cue a lunge. Maybe there's 1 or 2 cues that you haven't heard of that we can give you that can help out. So
that's awesome.
I'll pass it along to all the trainers. We have a big network of trainers, so anybody listening, it's relevant to all. Thank you guys for listening.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks,
you,
man.
Steve.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you for listening to A Few Good Physios. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Follow us each week while we interview guests and have clinical commentary.